Shalom. We're a few days before Pesach, and we're coming to the culmination of all of our physical preparation and our mental preparation and our intellectual preparation for Pesach, where we do this crazy thing. We sit around the table and we tell a story, and we tell a long story. We tell it the whole night, whether in a big group or in a family or even sitting alone at home. One tells the story to oneself. And that story of coming out of Egypt is constitutive of basically the self-perception of the Jewish people. It's something that we remember all the time. We remember it at Kiddush on Shabbat. We say Zecher L'Yetziat Mitzrayim, remembering coming out of Egypt. And God introduces God's self at Sinai or at the beginning of the Ten Commandments, and it's kind of his signature. I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. And in the Shema and so on, in lots of prayers, the story of coming out of Egypt is very, very present. And there's a commandment which in general it's an everyday commandment, but it's most present on Pesach itself, on the Seder night itself, where Maimonides codifies how one has to be when one is telling the story. Okay? And he says, Bechol dor vador chayav adam lirot et atzmo כאילו הוא בעצמו יצא עתה משעבוד מצרים. In every generation, one must see themselves as if they personally had come out of the slavery of Egypt. And this seeing yourself as if the story happened to you is very important. Now, many wiser people than me have really taken this text apart and looked at it from every angle possible, and I recommend plugging into some of those commentaries and explanations, which are really, really rich and powerful. I want to take us, in order to understand this text, what does it mean to see yourself as if you came out of Egypt? I want to look at other places where Rambam uses this language. Okay, so not just in a Pesach context, but in other contexts, this phrase, to see yourself as if, is used. And I think there's a kind of a very intentional, well thought out principle that Rambam is trying to teach us with this phrase. It's not accidental. I'm going to take just a few examples that are scattered through Mishneh Torah, through the code of law of Rambam, just to give you a sense of what this is used for. And I don't know, trigger warning, lots of them have to do with death. I'll quote one example from the laws of tshuva, the laws of repentance, where he says that it is necessary for every person to see themselves through the whole year as if evenly balanced between innocence and guilt. So as if all the goodness in the world and all the bad stuff in the world is equal, 50-50. And it's kind of scales, and what you're about to do now, the way you live your life, is going to change the balance of those two parts of good and bad. So if you do a good thing now, you are going to make the world better. You're going to make the world mostly good. And if you do a bad thing now, you will make the world majority evil. That's the responsibility that comes with seeing yourself as if the world is balanced in that way, 50-50. And he says later, ever should one see oneself as if one is close to death, lest he die during the interval as a consequence whereof he will be outstanding in his sin. So he says, you don't think that now I'll live for the moment and later when I'm old I'll reflect on my life and change my ways and so on. You should always think that the end of your life is now. You should always, and again he uses this language, see yourself as if you're close to death. Again, another death-related or mortality-related text, this time talking about mourning for other people. Okay, when someone close to you has died, he says, and it's a bit strange because he formulates how you should feel or how you should see yourself when mourning for someone else. And there's a timeline here. When mourning for the dead, during the first 3 days, you should see yourself as if a sword is touching your throat. Between the 3rd and 7th day, see yourself as if a sword is lying in the corner of the room. And afterwards, as if it is flying before you as you walk in the market. All this is to prepare you and to return you and wake you up from your sleep. It's a very powerful image, right? And just point out here, as in other places, the visualization exercise that he's suggesting or commanding us to do isn't to visualize the thing, it's the object, right? You're not meant to visualize the sword and it's so long and it's silver and so. You don't have to visualize the sword. You should see yourself as if a sword is on your throat. Meaning, see you, who are you? What kind of person are you when there's a sword on your throat? And again, I don't have time to go through all of them, but I recommend, if you have the time, to go to the link, read the source sheet, because there's lots of these, and this is why I feel confident in saying that there's a unified theory of what Rambam means when he says, see yourself as if. And that has to do with the function of the imagination. Okay, the imagination for Rambam is, on one hand, something a little bit dangerous because it's not real. He says, when you imagine things, you can get confused, you remember sensory perceptions, but they combine in non-rational ways. And the example he gives is a metal ship floating in the sky, right? That's something which you could imagine because you've seen birds flying in the sky and you've seen metal ships. But rationally, it could never happen that a metal ship would float in the sky. That's what he says. Nowadays we have airplanes, but now we imagine other things, which I don't know. The dialogue between rationality and imagination is an interesting one. But it's not just that that imagination is not right, it's not rational. It's actually a very important muscle to build up. And he says elsewhere in the Guide to the Perplexed that a perfected person is a master of imagination. Not a slave of imagination, they have a grip on reality, but they're a master of imagination because the way that God reveals God's self to a person is through inspiration, and inspiration needs imagination to hold it. And he says someone who has a perfected imaginative faculty, then the intellect, the divine intellect, like God's thoughts, overflow into this person's thoughts, and they will see the most extraordinary matters. They will see only God and his angels, and they will be aware and achieve knowledge of matters that constitute true opinions and general directives for the well-being of men in their relations with one another. So by having a perfected imagination, one is able to be a prophet, basically, and then know what the right thing to do is. Okay? So that to be a prophet, or to be a judge, or to be a leader, or to be someone who's influencing others, that influence comes from being influenced, and it's all about the flow of intellect, which the tool for receiving that is imagination. And therefore, all of these exercises are a way of improving the consciousness of ourselves in order to be a certain kind of person in the world. Right? All of these mitzvot, even Pesach, talking about this story, it's about perfecting yourself to be the kind of person who understands that they are not a slave. Or to be the kind of person who understands that life is fleeting. To be the kind of person who understands the enormous responsibility that they have every moment. And that's why the Pesach story isn't just a children's story, it's not just a historical story. It's a training in how to be the best versions of ourselves. So I hope that was a bit of food for thought, and I hope we have the chance this Pesach to really put that into practice. Chag Sameach.